everybody. You're tuned to the Full Court Press, the playoff edition. Kali, Warren Shaw. We're talking NBA playoffs for the Western Conference that starts this weekend, Saturday, April 20th. And of course, you know, it's just wonderful when we're talking about NBA playoff basketball because that means that the 8 best teams in the Western Conference get to go at it. Mr. Shaw, tell me how excited you are about the NBA playoffs starting this weekend.
Well, the best competition was out west all year long, so now we're going to get to see them go head-to-head in these playoffs matchups, man. I can't wait.
Most definitely. So this is how we at the Full Court Press is going to break it down for you, the listener. So the way that we looked at it, we felt that there were 4 critical categories in order to determine where we felt these teams are going to be best depicted at. We felt that it's going to come down to the starters, it's going to come down to the bench play, to coaching, and then what we feel like is the X factor player of the series that's going to be the difference maker for the teams. So that's how we're going to break it down between the 8 teams of the Western Conference. If you had an opportunity to check us out on a previous podcast talking about the Eastern Conference, you already understand how this thing shakes down. So let's go ahead and get this thing started and start off with the top team in the Western Conference. Of course, that being the Oklahoma City Thunder, led by Scott Brooks, against the Houston Rockets, Kevin McHale's team, coming in at the 8th seed. Shaw, I know you had an opportunity to watch the Houston Rockets as they do their thing. You give me your perspective about these little underdogs out there in that big state they call Texas.
Well, the Rockets blew their chance to avoid the Oklahoma City Thunder, by losing to the Lakers. So now they've made their bed. Now they got to lie in it, and but it's still going to be a great series. Harden coming back playing against his former team in Oklahoma City. I really like this matchup. In terms of an entertainment standpoint, I don't know how competitive Houston will be overall, but I definitely like it from an entertainment standpoint. Jeremy Lin going to get his first taste of real playoff action. James Harden proven to be the man now. See what that's going to be like for him on this team. Chandler Parsons definitely emerging, as one of the up and coming small forwards in this league. And Greg Smith and Omar Ashik are going to round out the Rockets starting 5.
I have to tell you that I truly love this first round matchup. I don't think that the Houston Rockets clearly wanted this matchup to come about. But when you think about the Oklahoma City Thunder, I think the Oklahoma City Thunder has an opportunity to make a statement in the first round that they could actually play credible defense. And what better way to do that than by stopping one of the premier scorers in the NBA in James Harden. When you look at what this Oklahoma City Thunder team can show offensively, I think is wonderful. Kevin Durant averaging 28 points a game. Russell Westbrook with 23. But to me, the key factors is going to be that front court, that starting front court of the Thunder. When you talk about Serge Ibaka, Kendrick Perkins, those guys have basically got to keep Harden from getting to the paint at will. And as a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if a couple elbows like, hey, how you doing? Welcome back, James Harden, knocking you down to the floor type stuff happens, because I think that's the kind of grit the Oklahoma City Thunder starters need to show from this point forward if their expectation is that they're going to an NBA Finals.
Again, with the Oklahoma City Thunder front court is definitely a little bit better than Houston's, and they will be key in keeping the penetration of Lin and Harden, out of the lane. Harden will, it's going to probably take a lot more threes in this series. They know him better than any other team in the league, obviously, and they're going to make it tough for him going forward. Cephalosha, I'm sure he's going to get under his skin, going to bump him, and going to push him a little bit, and that's going to force somebody else on the Houston Rockets starting lineup to step up.
Most definitely. So let's talk bench play. Whose bench seems to be deeper? Now, you look at all the moves that the Houston Rockets have made. They've got bodies for days to throw out. Greg Smith. They just got too many people I could even think of. You can't even name names to the number of people. When you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder, it's pretty much a household name. There's Kevin Martin, Reggie Jackson, and Nick Collison. Your run-of-the-mill basic come up off the bench. And then, oh, by the way, they've got that big savvy veteran, Derek Fisher, to also help run the point as well. When I think about this Oklahoma City Thunder team, I think as far as first round is concerned, they're covered on all facets. They've got everybody that can come in and supplement the necessary minutes to not have Durant and Westbrook drag themselves out for more than 35 minutes per game during this series.
Yeah, well, looking at the Rockets bench, I thought I was going to like it a little bit more than I do. But when you're really breaking it down to like Carlos Delfino is probably their best option coming off the bench, with Patrick Beverley coming in to back up the point guard. Francisco Garcia might see some time. Donatas Motiejunas might see some time, and even the 5th pick in the draft, Thomas Robinson is on this bench, but he hasn't been a factor for them much at all. So Delfino is going to be the biggest player that you see coming off Houston's bench, and if his 3 isn't going, then then they're not going to be getting much from the reserves at all.
All right, so let's go ahead and break it down from a coaching perspective. Scott Brooks has done an admirable job. He got this Oklahoma City Thunder team to 60 wins this season. But hey, what about Kevin McHale? I don't think enough has been said about Kevin McHale's job, what he did in Minnesota, and now what he's doing out here in Houston. He's got these young guys playing like grown men, and to me, it's very impressive. I think with Scott Brooks, he was inherited a very good team, and he's just showing them how to play better basketball. Whether or not he gets these guys to compete at the highest level, that being going to an NBA Finals, I think that he can do definitely enough to get them past a team like the Houston Rockets.
No, there's not a question in that one either, my friend. I think with McHale, yeah, he's a great teacher. He's a really great teacher. I just don't know. I'm not so sold on his X and O's just yet, but he's a great teacher. Especially if you have a big man and you want to have that guy learn some post moves and those types of things. But the X and O's, I definitely am going to go with Scott Brooks, because he's definitely preaching defense in Oklahoma City more so than McHale is. Houston led the league in scoring this year, but they did not lead anywhere near anywhere near the top in defense. So Scott Brooks definitely, I think, has an edge in this series.
All right, and then who do we have as your X factors for the series? I'll go ahead and I'll chime in. For me, if we're talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder, I think the X factor in this series is going to be Kevin Martin. You have to realize that in order for the Oklahoma City Thunder to be a legitimate threat at any point during this playoffs, it's going to have to be with the play of Kevin Martin coming off the bench. And I know people want to say, well, he's James Harden. We already knew that. Kevin Martin doesn't play James Harden's game, but Kevin Martin does play the kind of game that I think will be critical for the Oklahoma City Thunder. They need someone to hit those perimeter shots. And at a time when it was all about James Harden driving to the basket, you can look back and say, well, you know what? During the playoffs, James Harden couldn't hit a cold if it was slapped in the face and it was called a bubonic plague. And you got someone like Kevin Martin who's proven that he can hit that perimeter shot when given the opportunity. I think that if Kevin Martin gets off in this series, look out, he will be a threat throughout the rest of this playoffs.
No, again, once shooters get hot, it's hard to cool them down. So, yeah, I think that's a good pick for them. And then I think for me with Houston, I'm looking at Jeremy Lin. The whole insanity thing, and, everyone wants to know if he's worth the contract and the money that he got. Well, now he's going to get a chance to prove it. Because like I said earlier, I think the Thunder know James Harden very, very well. And they're going to take a lot of the things that Harden liked to do away from him and maybe even force Harden to be more of a passer. So will Lin be ready now to score? Will Lin be able to penetrate? Will he be able to play even up to the same par as or close to Russell Westbrook? That's a matchup that, Westbrook should dominate, but if Lin can play even somewhere near him, even statistically speaking, then Houston has a chance to make it a little bit of a series.
Most definitely. So who do you have moving on in the series between Oklahoma City Thunder, Houston Rockets?
No surprises here, man. I think Oklahoma City takes this pretty easily, probably 5 games.
Yeah, I think that the Oklahoma City Thunder is going to dominate this in 5 games. I'm even leaning a little bit more to the sweep. I just think that Oklahoma City is more poised, and I think that if we see the not-so-nice Kevin Durant playing, I think he's not going to take lightly to anything that James Harden is going to try to do, whether it be in Oklahoma City or in Houston. I just think that the Thunder is just way too much of a better team for the Houston Rockets to deal with right now. You are in tune to the Full Court Press, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw. We're talking NBA playoff basketball for the Western Conference. Be sure to get at us at CLMecca75 or at Shaw Sports. Hashtag The Baseline, which is our weekly podcast where we talk the NBA, or you can get at us hashtag GameFace Weekly. So let's go ahead and move on to the second matchup in the Western Conference, that being the San Antonio Spurs, no country for old men Spurs, versus the LA Lakers. Now, you know what? 10 years ago, we would have been saying, whew, this is the matchup of matchups. We don't want this in the first round. But you know what, Shaw? I really do think, given the way that the Los Angeles Lakers came into the playoff picture and the way that the San Antonio Spurs entered into the final week of the season, you can make a serious argument that this is a great first round matchup between these two traditionally great franchises.
Well, there's some talk about the Spurs wanting to avoid LA and tanking, giving LA a chance, I guess, to get in at the 8th seed or whatever it was. And now, all of a sudden the Lakers, found themselves magically in the 7th seed, finding themselves against the Spurs anyway. Spurs won the season series 2-1. But again, I think the Lakers are poised to make it more of a challenge than people think may think to begin with. With Steve Nash, Jody Meeks, Metta World Peace, Pau Gasol, and Dwight Howard, that's not a bad starting 5. And there's even some talk that Steve Blake may step into the starting lineup in place of Meeks. So I like the Spurs. I like the Lakers. Going up against the Spurs, especially with San Antonio struggling a little bit. I think Howard can dominate the splitter matchup, and then Gasol and Duncan. Said I think, hey, those are two old-time veterans that can pretty much play even basketball.
Most definitely. When I look at the San Antonio Spurs, I got to tell you something. Even though they won 58 games, the way that they've won these games and the way that Greg Popovich has orchestrated this team to play at the level that they've been playing throughout this season and really over the span of the Duncan, Parker, and Ginobili era has been fascinating. Think about this real quick. When you think about NBA playoff basketball, you always find that there is a marquee player on every team that is going to dominate. When you think about the San Antonio Spurs have 6 players, 6 of the 15 that's on the roster that's averaging over 10 points per game, and Gary Neal is closely behind to make it 7 at 9.5. This team is balanced across the board, and as much as we say, well, the LA Lakers, they look like that type of team that could actually push the San Antonio Spurs, I think it's just a question of health, because if the San Antonio Spurs would be as healthy as what they looked like earlier this season, I would give the Los Angeles Lakers no chance to handle any of the starters that the San Antonio Spurs have on that court. When you look at Parker, Duncan, you look at Kawhi Leonard, these guys know how to play the Popovich system, and when executed to perfection, there's really very little many teams can do to stop them.
No, I don't think there's much doubt in what you're saying right there, man. And even like I said, moving on to the Lakers bench, there's really not much of a bench to speak of. D'Antoni likes to run his players into the ground, and we're looking at, guys like Earl Clark, Antoine Jamison, and again, we don't know if it's going to be Blake or Meeks that's going to start and which one's going to come off the bench, but that puts them about maybe 3 people in, a rotation of only 8 players, and you're going to need some more firepower against the Spurs who go like 9-10 deep at times. Most definitely.
Now, when I think about the San Antonio Spurs bench, they have a good bench. I don't think they have a great bench, but they have a good bench. And when you have guys like Matt Bonner, he's a seasoned veteran, he's a champion. These guys, they know what it takes in order to hit clutch shots, win basketball games. And maybe earlier this year, if I said to you that Steve Blake was actually coming from the bench, that I could say right now at this very moment that, yeah, the matchup between Gary Neal and Blake would be more so to Gary Neal's favor. But Gary Neal has had somewhat of a disappointing season. He's kind of fell off, and I think he may be even in Greg Popovich's doghouse. We'll see what happens as the playoffs transpired, but I would have given the edge to the Spurs bench simply because they're more veteran savvy and they're a lot deeper and they've got more bodies to throw out. And in the Popovich system, these guys are ready to go at the drop of a dime.
Yeah, it really comes down to exactly what you said, that system that the Spurs have been able to kind of plug and play guys. So, yeah, definitely the Spurs bench has the edge in this series.
All right, so then let's go ahead and talk about the coaching, be it though we think that it might even be a little lopsided, right? Come on, Greg Popovich, Mike D'Antoni. Listen, the resume for Greg Popovich is just really doesn't even need to be said, okay? And so there's no reason to even talk about making comparisons to Mike D'Antoni. But what I will say is what will be interesting is how will Greg Popovich play his players? How will he be forced to extend those minutes on his marquee players because his bench is not producing? And I think that to me is going to be the key. It's not so much what Greg Popovich does to Mike D'Antoni, but what Greg Popovich might do to himself.
Now, the only thing that that you can knock Popovich for is the same thing that you can praise him for, is in the fact that he's stubborn. So sometimes he doesn't necessarily go to a matchup that he should, or call a guy in. Like I remember last year with the whole DeJuan Blair thing. Blair should have been playing in that Oklahoma City series from game 3, and then he didn't wait until he went to game 5 to finally give him some minutes. So, that's the only thing that kind of gets in his way. But, comparing him to D'Antoni, there's no comparison. Pop definitely has the advantage here.
All right. So with that being said, let's talk about the X factors in the series. Shaw, who do you think is going to be the X factor for the Los Angeles Lakers?
Man, can I cop out on this one? Because I don't even know. Everybody needs to play well for the Lakers to have a punch of chance in this series. But I'm going to go with Steve Blake, like I said, because if he's able to play at the 2, or even if he's coming in and spelling Nash, I think he's going to be being key to keeping the Lakers offense on track. Whether he's starting or coming off the bench, he's going to have to get people involved, and he's going to have to even score himself, especially if Nash isn't 100%.
All right, well, to me, I think the X factor in this series is going to be Kawhi Leonard. And it's very similar to how I felt Kevin Martin was for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think this is Kawhi Leonard's time. We've been talking about this guy. We've been talking about his upside. We talked about how Greg Popovich loves this guy. When you think about what's going on with Manu Ginobili, he's not going to be available. You know, if he is, it'll probably be towards the latter end of the series, or maybe not even until the second round. This is Kawhi Leonard's time. He basically is given the keys to be that Ginobili, and Popovich needs that Ginobili. I don't know if he can find it in anybody else, because he knows that Tony Parker's only got so much in him and Tim Duncan's only got so much in him. So this is on Kawhi Leonard. He's got to be that guy. Make a defensive stop, hit the shots, dribble, penetrate. Just basically be the all-around guy that Greg Popovich saw when he came out of San Diego State. If he could be that dude, the Lakers have no chance, because he is a mismatch nightmare for D'Antoni's system.
Yeah, well, he's a two-way player, you know what I mean? So I think that's something that, a lot of teams wish they had. And, he's still young. He can even get up there and dunk. Just very unassuming, and he fits the San Antonio system very, very well. Ginobili actually did come back tonight. I think he only played maybe 11 or so minutes, but that just gives him that much more depth, and probably the edge in this series.
All right, so what are our predictions? Who do we think is going to basically move on in this matchup? Well, from my take, I'm basically looking at the San Antonio Spurs. I think that the San Antonio Spurs is going to go 7 with the Los Angeles Lakers. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I don't see the overall dominance in the San Antonio Spurs team that I've seen during the beginning of the second half of the season, or the beginning of the season. And I think that with the way that the Lakers came in, they're riding on a lot of emotion. Kobe Bryant going down. I think that the Lakers are going to push this team. And again, like you alluded to before, Dwight Howard is going to be a nightmare down in the front court.
Well, there's no doubt about Howard, but again, he's definitely going to dominate that matchup with Splitter. I still think the Spurs, win it somewhat handily, maybe 5, maybe even 6 games. I think the Lakers do have some pride, and like I said, they've shown a lot of grit and moxie coming into the final run here for the playoffs. So they're definitely not going to get swept. But I say Spurs in 5, maybe 6.
All right. Well, I was trying to be generous, so I'm trying to give a little credit to Mike D'Antoni by saying it goes 7, but I wouldn't be surprised if I got slapped in the face by them getting knocked out in 5. All right. So there you go. You're in tune to the Full Court Press. Cal Lee Warren Shaw. We're talking NBA playoff basketball, Western Conference matchups. Be sure to get at us, www.ipatio.com. You can also find our previous podcast posted on iTunes, and then we are also on Mixcloud and SoundCloud. So let's go ahead and move on to the third matchup of the Western Conference playoff picture, and that is going to be the Denver Nuggets. Excuse me, I move one team ahead. The Denver Nuggets, boy, this team is they hot, they on fire. They're gonna be taking on Mark Jackson's Golden State Warriors. Shaw, what do you love about the starting core of those Golden State Warriors, that team from out in the Bay? Yay.
Well, it starts with Stephen Curry, man. He just set the league. He set the league record for the most amount of threes in the season, topping Ray Allen in the final night's games here. So it starts with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson again. Another great shooter on the rise. Harrison Barnes was an excellent pick for them at the small forward. David Lee, and then again running out that starting 5 with Andrew Bogut. So I definitely think they have the guys who can challenge the Denver starters. I'm loving this Stephen Curry Ty Lawson matchup. I think that's going to be a great thing to watch. 2 great point guards going at it for years to come. But then definitely what's going to be what you want to see is how Harrison Barnes handles himself, and Klay Thompson, how they handle themselves in their first playoffs.
Yeah, I got to tell you something. The Denver Nuggets, to me, is by far one of the most impressive teams. And I'll even go as far as to say this. I would not be surprised if George Karl is in heavy consideration to being given Coach of the Year honors, given what he was able to get this Denver Nuggets team to do. 57 wins. I mean, this is like the most in franchise history. You've never seen this happen post Carmelo Anthony era. And you talk about the Western Conference being as hard as it is with the teams that are out there in the Western Conference. I got to give a lot of credit to George Karl, first of all, for doing that. And you look at this roster, this is a very balanced and a very athletic roster. I think this is the perfect perfect roster that George Karl wants to coach. And I think that these guys are coming into their own. The fact that they were able to get Andre Iguodala was pretty much like a God-sent caretake package, because now you have a perimeter defender who basically is able to mask some of the defensive inefficiencies that the Denver Nuggets could not mask in previous years that got them knocked out in the playoffs. I think that this is a favorable matchup for the Denver Nuggets. Their starting core, they can score, they can run up and down, but I think they also have what it takes to defend at a better clip than what they were last year, especially against the heavier offensive teams like a Golden State Warrior team.
Yeah, the Nuggets definitely have improved in that area. Just because like they play at such a high pace, people don't think they defend. But with those bigs, and especially even the bench that we'll talk about shortly, they block a lot of shots, they get a lot of rebounds, and they're not easy to score on, as many people would think, just because they score over 100 points a game.
Most definitely. So let's talk about the bench. The Denver Nuggets bench, I think, is about as deep a bench as you will find in this NBA playoffs. They can go 12 deep if they want to. Everybody can go out there and straight up just pure ball. And if you've got a point guard like Ty Lawson, who's basically going to give the rock, Andre Miller coming off of the bench, backing up Ty Lawson. I mean, you've got a slow, quick tempo pace. You've got a full court press pace. You've got a half court press pace. I mean, they've got all facets of the game covered if played and executed correctly. There's no question that this team can actually surprise people, especially when you think about how good and deep their bench is with JaVale McGee. I mean, he's a solid big backing up Kufis. I mean, come on, man. This Denver Nuggets team is not to be joked with.
Well, again, you said it. You hit it there again, my friend. Like I said, what happens with Denver is, I remember the joke that was made a couple years ago when they traded Carmelo, is that all of a sudden they're like Noah's Ark. They're too deep at every position. So and that hasn't even changed at all. They got Iguodala now, and again, that bench is stacked and definitely probably the best bench in the NBA playoffs. But for Golden State standpoint, you can't overlook Jarrett Jack, who's been a huge coup for them this year. Was brought in to be basically insurance for Stephen Curry, and has came in to be one of the major players and finishes many of their games for them, pushing Andrew Bogut out at many times, sliding Lee to the center spot. So they run a lot of times. They run a lot of three-guard lineups with Curry, Jack, and Thompson out there. So he's going to be in there to close the games for them. And don't forget Carl Landry as well, who's able to come in and score and rebound for them. All
right, so then let's go ahead and move to the coaching. And I mean, look, I would tell you that it would be slightly unfair if we were saying, you know what, let's make these comparisons of George Karl to Mark Jackson. But think about it this from an interesting perspective. Look, neither one of these coaches has an NBA championship. And while George Karl definitely has the savvy because he is coached in an NBA Finals, he has numerous playoff wins under his belt, and he's coached and been successful with not only Seattle Supersonics, but now also here with the Denver Nuggets, it's easy to say, well, you know what? George Karl has a decisive edge. But I got to tell you something. Something is left to be said when you think about what Mark Jackson has been able to do with this Golden State Warriors team, a team that was not even expected to make it into the NBA playoff picture this year.
Mark Jackson has that team playing defense. You know what I mean? And they believe in their coach, and they like their coach. I mean, that's one of the something that you won't see too often in this series, is that both teams really take to their coaches and their systems and the things that they preach. So they both have a great handle on their ball clubs. But I still give the edge a little bit to Karl simply because of the veteran aspect of it, and he's been with his team a little bit longer. But again, I definitely wouldn't count Mark Jackson out that easily.
All right, so with that being said, who are going to be the X factors of the series? Shaw, give me who you think is going to be the X factor for the Golden State Warriors.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how Thompson and Barnes react to the playoff pressure. But the guy I'm looking at for Golden State is Andrew Bogut, man. He's been struggling with his injuries. His health is going to be the key to this series. If he's going to be able to bolster that Golden State defense that we were just talking about, that Mark Jackson is preaching, then Golden State has a chance, to push this series and maybe even upset Denver. His scoring is not what they need. They need him to defend. They need him to rebound, to clog the lane, block a couple of shots. And if he can keep Ty Lawson and Andre Miller out of the lane, then that helps Denver. I mean, helps Golden State really a lot, especially with the rebounding standpoint and not letting Denver get off those easy threes.
Yeah, when you think about the Denver Nuggets, I mean, to me, it would be easy if I told you one person was being an X factor. But just like you said, this team can be too deep. And just basically, that's what it feels like when I'm selecting my X factors of the series. I couldn't select just one person. So I'm going to give you three people that I think will be critical for the Denver Nuggets to advance into the second round of the playoffs. And that's going to be Wilson Chandler, Corey Brewer, and Kenneth Faried. First, with Kenneth Faried, it's just basically his health. If Kenneth Faried is not 100% off of the ankle injury, that's going to be a problem. He's their best front court bully out there, and he also rebounds the ball at an exceptional level, which is critical when you think about how good this Golden State Warriors team plays from the perimeter. But then now when I think about Corey Brewer and I think about Wilson Chandler, their position, playing the 2-3 position, is critical because of the loss of Danilo Gallinari. Danilo Gallinari was their closest go-to shooter. And so now you have Corey Brewer, who has to assume a much more active role, and Wilson Chandler, who is now going to be that guy coming off the bench as like a six-man primary type of dude, I think will be critical to offset the gameplay and the athleticism that the Golden State Warriors will present, because Mark Jackson is going to look for those mismatches, and I think that's going to be the key. If those three guys get themselves in gear, get off early, there is no question the Denver Nuggets will cruise to the second round.
Yeah, I like the pick, especially with Faried. Because if he's out there rebounding and he's able to get, double-digit rebounds, and that's going to, negate a lot of what Golden State is trying to do with their bigs as well. So, yeah, good picks there.
All right, so then who do we have for moving on into the series? For me, I think the Denver Nuggets are going to take this in 6, because the Denver Nuggets have been here. They've done that. They took the Los Angeles Lakers to 7 games. They know what it takes. If they are up early against the Golden State Warriors, they're not going to mess around and allow the Warriors to hang around. They're going to put them to sleep and put them to sleep early. I just don't know if Mark Jackson has enough to get this team to play up if they get kicked early by a very vaunting and a very deep Denver Nuggets team. I say they take them in 6.
I'm agree with you there too. I think Iguodala, putting pressure on guys like Klay Thompson and Barnes, again, who haven't been in this situation before, I think that's going to negate some of the great shooting that they've had throughout the season. Golden State crowd is amazing, so I think that's definitely going to propel them to a win or two, but no more than that. Denver in 6.
All right, most definitely. You are tuned to the Full Court Press. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw. We're talking NBA playoff basketball for the Western Conference. And wait, we 3 teams deep in it, bro. So that means we've got one more marquee matchup for the Western Conference, and that's going to be the Los Angeles Clippers, Lob City, versus the Grindhouse, the Memphis Grizzlies. Shaw, this to me is a great matchup because we witnessed it last year on how these two teams went at it going 7 games. Man, you could not find a better first-round matchup in the Western Conference than a rematch of what happened last year between these two franchises.
Yeah, well, when you think of NBA rivalries, you don't necessarily think LA and Memphis, but this is actually what it is. So, like you said, 7 games last year. The Clippers won 3 of the 4 games they played this year, with one of those games coming, I think, last week. And it was a very, very, very crucial to letting the Clippers keep home court advantage in this series. But Memphis, they've played very well since the trade of Rudy Gay. They're starting lineup. They're going to be throwing Mike Conley, Tony Allen, Tayshaun Prince, Zach Randolph, and Marc Gasol out there. And I really like that Marc Gasol matchup against DeAndre Jordan, because Gasol can play off the outside of the paint, and he's going to run a lot of the Memphis offense, from that free throw line extended, which negates Jordan's athleticism and rebounding, because he's going to be chasing Gasol around at the free throw line extended. So I like that matchup for Memphis. Definitely.
When you look at the starters of the Los Angeles Clippers, look, they are who they are. I feel like Denny Green. They are who we think they are. I mean, that's how they roll. They put that ball up in the air. Blake Griffin, go get it. DeAndre Jordan, go get it. Caron Butler, shoot it. Chauncey Billups, shoot it. Chris Paul, jack it or dish it, whichever. That's what they do. That's Lob City. And I just think that when you look at this team is poised. But is this team prepared? And I think that's the difference. Are they prepared? And I think it's going to come down to Chris Paul. He is the best guard in the NBA right now. And he has an opportunity to prove the critics exactly to why they've given him that accolade. If he is able to do what he did last year, helping to propel this team to go to that second round, and the expectations is this LA Clippers team should be good enough to make it to the second round. But they have problems against teams like the Memphis Grizzlies, teams that like to bang with them. And I just think that if the Los Angeles Clippers expect to get far, they're going to have to start showing a little moxie when they step out on that basketball court. And who none better to test them, and it's better to test them now than with the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, well, the knock on the Clippers is that they're finesse guys. They like to throw the ball around. And, can they handle the rigorous battles of the playoffs when it comes to the pushing and the shoving? And Memphis pushed them to the test last year. And again, the Clippers actually got past them in 7 games or on the road. They won that 7th game in Memphis. So I definitely like how the Clippers have grown in this over the last 2 years. But Memphis is no slouch.
Definitely. So let's go ahead and look at the benches. Whose bench is deepest? To me, from my take for the Los Angeles Clippers, you can't get any deeper when you have Jamal Crawford coming off of your bench. I just feel that he is he is basically like the nuke that you just drop on teams that are just not prepared to deal with or handle a situation of any offensive ability whatsoever. Jamal Crawford is just the man. He himself is the bench for most other teams that are playing in this playoff picture. And for the Clippers to have him, that is a luxury. Didn't have that type of dude last year, and I'm sure that they are glad they're going to have him this year, because I think he's going to be lighting up the Memphis Grizzlies backcourt at will once he steps out there.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment as too. The Clippers came into the season possessing probably the best bench, at least on paper. A couple guys haven't really produced for them, but definitely, their bench is still one of the best, especially with Eric Bledsoe as well, spelling Chris Paul. But for Memphis, we're looking at Jared Bayless, Ed Davis, Darrell Arthur, Quincy Pondexter, and even veteran guard Keon Dooling. Again, it's not exactly a murderer's row. Davis is going to be his first playoff series. Darrell Arthur, he was out last year, I think, with a leg injury. But I really like what they're able to do in terms of playing their roles off the Memphis bench. They're just not as explosive as the Clippers are.
All right, so then with that being said, let's go right into the coaching. Vinny Del Negro is always on the hot seat. And obviously, if he doesn't get this team out of the first round, there's going to be speculations as to whether or not he should be the coach for Lob City. And then you got Lionel Hollins. I mean, what more can this man not do? He is the best. He is the most untalked about successful head coach in the NBA. So when I think about the LA Clippers and I think about Vinny Del Negro, yeah, this is Tinseltown, but you know what? You couldn't have a more talented group of guys to use at your disposal against a team like the Memphis Grizzlies. My expectations is that Vinny Del Negro is of a sound mind, and if he can keep his players poised and to buy into what he wants them to do, I think that they'll be fine against a team like the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, they'll be fine simply because, again, they have so much talent, and again, they have Chris Paul. So Chris Paul is like a player coach out there anyway. So I think that's what gives LA itself the advantage. But if you're talking about just pure X's and O's, I think Lionel Hollins is a little bit better coach than Del Negro is right now. But again, Del Negro is no slouch, and again, he has Chris Paul in his back pocket.
Most definitely. So, X factor of the series. Shaw, you tell me, because this can go either way, and I think that's going to be a clear sign and indicative of where we're going to go with how we predict this series. But who do you feel will be the X factor in the series for the Memphis Grizzlies?
Well, the key for the Grizzlies is are they going to be able to score, consistently to keep up with LA? We know that they can defend, but can they score? And I think that comes down to, will Jared Bayless be a reliable option off the bench for them in the playoffs? He will need to ensure that the Grizz don't get beat to sleep when the Clippers reserves come on and take the floor. So he has to be able to match some of that firepower and offensively, I'm even talking about defense, and I know defense wins championships, but he has to keep Memphis in the game with his scoring. He can hit the three. He can even create for others. I'm really looking for Jared Bayless to be the X factor for the Memphis Grizzlies.
For the Los Angeles Clippers, I'm going to go with 2 players. My first player is going to be Blake Griffin. This is Blake Griffin's opportunity to be that dominant power forward. This is his series for him to basically put on notice that he is going to be a legitimate threat big man 4. And he can do that by basically bodying up Zach and basically just punking Marc Gasol. If he cannot do that, the Los Angeles Clippers are not moving on into the second round. And the second person that I consider as an X factor for this series is Rudy Gay. Because like I told you before, Shaw, the Memphis Grizzlies is going to live to regret not having Rudy Gay during this season. I don't care what they were going to do next season, but the athleticism of Rudy Gay was so paramount to what the Memphis Grizzlies were doing to the Los Angeles Clippers last year that this year I think it's going to be even more indicative, because he could have created mismatch problems for this Los Angeles Clippers team, who has now got a year under their belt and the confidence that they can beat the Memphis Grizzlies at will. The same athleticism and the same type of play that I think you might be looking for when you talk about that Memphis Grizzlies team. So that's who I'm looking at as my X factors of the series for the Los Angeles Clippers.
Huh, that's a good call, you know what I mean? But it's, I think the argument to that is that they had Gay last year and they still lost. So, and the Clippers are better than they were last year for sure. But yeah, I think that's an interesting call there, and I definitely think Memphis, they miss athleticism, they miss scoring as well. So Tayshaun Prince doesn't have any of those things. So yeah, it should be very interesting to see how it plays out.
All right, now I don't have any drums, so I can't do my drum roll shtick for you, but let's go ahead and get right to it, bro. Who's winning this series? Who's moving to the second round? Clippers, Grizzlies?
I think it's going to be a repeat of last year. I think the Clippers pull it out, and probably in 7 games as well. This time, Game 7 will be in LA, though.
All right, I'm going to have to agree with you. I think the Los Angeles Clippers, I think the Clippers actually are going to show a little bit more moxie this time in beating the Memphis Grizzlies. I think that they're going to do 6 games. I think the Memphis Grizzlies, while formidable, I think that they took a step back, and it might show its true colors during the duration of a series like this against a more formidable front court, athletic front court in that of the Los Angeles Clippers. I say Clippers move in 6. So, Shaw, dude, we just ran through the Eastern and Western Conference playoffs first round, man.
I can't believe it. Can't believe it's here. I can't believe we did it as quickly as we did. Lots of great information. I think you did a stellar job there. A great analysis. And I hope the listeners enjoy it, man.
Most definitely. And listen, for all of you who just don't want to watch the NBA playoffs, would like to participate in the NBA playoffs, well, we're going to give you an opportunity to do so. Join up our league. It's the Baseline Challenge. Go to www.nba.com/drive. Put our league name, The Baseline. And when you register, you'll be participating in an NBA Fantasy League. The rules will be provided to you when you go to the website. It's a fun league. We've already got people set up. Myself, Mr. Shaw is set up on there. And we're going to be talking about it throughout the duration of the playoffs. So when you have an opportunity, go to the website, register, and sign on and have fun with us only on Game Face Weekly. For Game Face Weekly's Full Court Press, Mr. Shaw, I'm Cal Lee. You've just been locked in with the Western Conference playoff analysis and predictions. Stay tuned with us as we'll continue to give you fun analysis and coverage of the NBA playoffs as we move forward. You guys have a great evening.